Yes.
So we're now going to move on to look at the presentation on Wales, and specifically the question of the role of the Welsh office in relation to any impact on decision-making made in Westminster. I'm going to start by introducing the relevant people in power at this stage. Nicholas Edwards was the Secretary of State for Wales from 1979 to 1987 under Mrs Thatcher's government, and he was succeeded by Peter Walker from 1987 to 1990. Wyn Roberts was the Parliamentary Under Secretary at the Welsh Office from 1979 to 1987, when he became the Minister of State at the Welsh Office. Michael Roberts, Mark Robinson and Ian Grist all served as junior ministers in the Welsh Office during the 1980s. And then in relation to the Chief Medical Officer for Wales, Dr Richard Bevan was in that role from 1969 to 1977, followed by Professor Gareth Crompton, 1978 to 1989, and he was succeeded by Dame Deirdre Hine, who held that post from 1990 to 1997, and she'd been the Deputy CMA before that. Dr David Ferguson Lewis was the Senior Medical Officer in the Welsh Office in the 1980s, and we're going to come on to look at some documents authored by him in that period. We also see a Dr Pritchard, who was a Senior Advisor at the Welsh Office. And so you've heard oral evidence from Dr John Napier, known as Tony Napier, who was the Medical Director of the Welsh Regional Blood Transfusion Services from 1977 to 1998. Now, of course, the Welsh Regional Transfusion Service was a separate organisation, but it fell under the remit of the Welsh Office in terms of responsibility. He's provided a written witness statement and gave oral evidence over 2 days, as I've said. Before we look at the detail, a word on evidence, as we've discussed this morning. Presently, the only witness statement we have is from Dr Napier, who, of course, was not inside the Welsh Office, and we have not a complete picture in relation to documents. We are investigating at the moment if there are any appropriate individuals who could be called to give oral evidence, and those investigations are underway. It appears from the documents that sometimes some of the communications took place over the telephone or before or after committee meetings. And of course, in the absence of oral evidence, that's quite difficult to capture as an element of evidence for you, sir. The other aspect is that minutes of committee meetings are by nature quite formal documents, and they don't always capture this question about the relationship between different government organisations and departments. But from the evidence available that we do have, and especially in contrast to Northern Ireland and the evidence we saw this morning, it appears that there was more dialogue and more interaction between the Welsh Office in relation to its interactions with the Department of Health in London. So we're going to take a general look at the overview of that relationship, starting with 7 examples from the management of blood services. So could we start, please, Lawrence? DHSC 303738_026. So this is a document we can see from the 8th of October 1976, and it's about the organisation of National Blood Transfusion Service. And we can see at the bottom that this is from an R.A. Owen at the Welsh Office going to the Department of Health and Social Security, Elephant and Castle in London. What this says, second paragraph please, relates to some earlier correspondence from Jim Morgan, who was in the Welsh Office. As he explained, we would like to play a full part in the proposed review of the National Blood Transfusion Service, and we've arranged with Dutton for Jim Morgan and our Chief Medical Officer, Dr Dick Bevan, to attend the preliminary office meetings on the 20th of October. No doubt you will send us any papers in due course. So this is an example of a desire for Welsh involvement in relation to this question about reorganisation of the blood transfusion service. Just come out of that magnification. Bottom paragraph, please. We would like a Welsh presence on both of the proposed study groups. For the clinical users group, we had in mind Dr. Bloom of University Hospital of Wales Haemophilia Unit, and for organisational study, Jim Morgan from here, and Dr. Bevan, the Director of the BTC for Wales. So this is one example of where we see Professor Bloom playing a role in Welsh office presentation or representation. Obviously, this inquiry has heard a lot of evidence about Professor Bloom over the last few years, but this is an example of the Welsh office volunteering him for a specific role to look at the reorganisation of the blood transfusion service. Next document, please. DHSC 302 181 _ 054, please. So this is a much later document. We can see 2nd of November 76. And this is a meeting on the Central Committee for the National Blood Transfusion Services that took place at the Department of Health in London. And if we scroll down, we can see attendance there from Dr. Lovett of the Welsh office. No attendance by Northern Ireland, but we can see some Welsh attendance. And if we look at paragraph 2, please. Sorry, page 2, paragraph 3.8, just over the page, Lawrence. There's a discussion about Wales here at item 15.1 of the agenda. Dr. Lovett said that the Welsh office, while accepting the desirability of rebuilding the Cardiff Blood Transfusion Centre, the main teaching hospital site, did not consider the scheme of sufficient priority to justify the necessary expenditure at present. The present buildings were considered serviceable for at least another 10 years, provided that certain relatively inexpensive improvements for which expenditure has been authorised were carried out. So we can see here that this is Dr. Lovett of the Welsh office representing the Welsh office position, specifically on this issue of whether to rebuild the Cardiff Blood Transfusion Centre. Lawrence, can I just see the next paragraph, please? And the response to that presentation was that the committee endorsed the principle that regional transfusion centres should be located adjacent to a major general hospital, ideally a teaching hospital. Professor Jacobs said that according to his information, very heavy expenditure would be required to bring that centre up to standard. The chairman suggested that Professor Jacobs should take up any outstanding points over the Cardiff Centre with the Welsh office direct. So again, some evidence within these minutes of representation by the Welsh office at this national meeting. Now the next document I want to look at, DHSC 302181 _ 056, please. So same period, this is 19th of November 1976, and this is a letter from the department in London going to Mr. Morgan in the Welsh office, Jim Morgan. We can see here this issue about a working group on likely trends in demand. What's being proposed here, we can see in the third paragraph, written to RAO and explaining that Dr. Bloom would be consulted and indeed invited to meet the group at some stage in their deliberations. scroll down, please, Lawrence. Those are the proposed individuals for the membership of this group. Final paragraph. The idea is that rather than call all the experts to a series of meetings, the working group should meet them individually and encourage them to put forward their personal assessment on trends and requirements. So the position looks like from these documents that Professor Bloom is put forward by the Welsh office to have a presence on this committee, and the response from London is that those individuals set out there will be the members of that group, but they'll draw on expertise of Professor Bloom consulting him, but not in terms of formal membership. Now the next document, NHBT 001816. Thank you. So this is jumping forward in time, sir. We're now in January 1983, but it's a meeting of the Advisory Committee on the National Blood Transfusion Service. And if we scan down the membership list, we can see that Dr. Ferguson Lewis, who I highlighted in the beginning of the presentation, is a member of this committee, along with various others from different regional health associations in part of England, including Dr. Lane, who obviously was the director of BPL. But contrast that with the observer position, where we can see representation from Northern Ireland and Scotland. But here we've got Welsh office membership of this committee rather than what could be termed as mere observer status, with possibly some suggestion that the Welsh had a more significant representation on this committee. We can see in paragraph 1 the chairman welcoming him as attending from the Welsh office. This meeting, sir, just so you're clear, discussed a wide range of topics, things like stock control, record keeping, hospital blood banks, and there's a discussion about the creation of the Central Blood Laboratories Authority. Dr. Pritchard of the Welsh office is noted to have attended this meeting on behalf of Dr. Ferguson Lewis on at least one occasion. Then can we look at SCGV 50H3_024, please. So this is a letter, 28th of February 1983, and it's from the Department of Health in London to a Mr. Thomas at the Welsh office. The topic we can see is blood transfusions, record keeping and stock control arrangements. What we see here in the second paragraph is that ministers have set health authorities a relatively short deadline for comments, and I enclose for your information our letter to the health authorities in England. I should perhaps explain that I've sent a copy of the draft circular to all regional transfusion directors, including Dr. Napier in Cardiff, to assist in the local consultation process. As you will see from the attached letter, I've made the point that the comments should be routed through the appropriate regional team of officers. I hope I have not trodden on any Welsh toes.
The word any is not there.
Sorry, I hope I have not trodden on Welsh toes by sending a copy to Tony Napier. He is included for very good reason on the distribution list of all my other letters to regional transfusion directors, and it would be a very pointed omission indeed were he not to receive a copy of the draft circular on this net. So the reference to treading on Welsh toes, so there's no broader context in this letter, it might be suggested that there is a suggestion of a demarcation between the role of the Welsh office and the role of the Welsh Regional Blood Transfusion Service. That's one possible interpretation. Then at the bottom of the letter it says that I'm sending a copy of this letter to John Wassell, I think, in Scotland, Mr. Green in Northern Ireland, though I would not suggest for one moment they need to automatically follow suit. However, they will obviously wish to be aware of what progress is being made in this area.
I mean, the suggestion appears to be that the Scots and Northern Irish have their own independent arrangements.
Yes.
He is concerned, the author of this is apparently concerned by including Dr. Napier in the circulation about how you should record keep and keep control of your stock. He might be interfering with Welsh autonomy.
Absolutely, sir. That's the interpretation I think is most natural in reading this.
Yes, thank you.
So perhaps a piece of evidence that suggests a demarcation in roles. DHSC 302323_045, please, Lawrence. So this is a document dated 9th of August 1985, and it's come from the department in London to Mr. Dredge at the Welsh office. And again, it's this topic about the future management of the National Blood Transfusion Service. What is said here is that a first draft of a paper about the reorganisation of the MBTS is enclosed. And the first paragraph says this: I'm conscious that it does not attempt to define in detail how the suggested SHA might be organised, not least of all in the area of special interest to you, viz. The way Wales would wish to be involved in such a move. So again, sir, this is an example of London notifying Cardiff and asking for its views in relation to this particular topic, development of the National Blood Transfusion Service. I should be grateful for your preliminary views and comments on this point. And he says this: I must ask you to treat this paper as management in confidence at this stage and not divulge its contents outside the Welsh office itself. Then third paragraph, if you would prefer to proceed this way, I would be happy to discuss the paper by telephone or with you when you were next in London. So that's one example of the oral communications that I raised at the outset of the presentation. And then on a different topic, he goes on to say, I'm conscious that I've not yet replied to your letter of the 19th of June 1985 about Welsh office representation at the CBLA. Perhaps you will accept my apologies for the delay. As you will see from this letter, I've been concentrating on the wider organisational issues. If you agree, I would propose taking Welsh office interests on board in this wider context, with an undertaking that if nationalisation comes to naught, we will revert to the issue in the narrower CBLA context. So again, this is an example of an awareness, one could suggest, from London about the need to include and take input or comments from the Welsh office on these two topics. Now, DHSC 302323_056 So we've looked at some examples of London to Cardiff communications, and this is an example, 10th of September 1985, of a letter coming from the Welsh office going to Mr. Williams in London on the same topic, future management of the National Blood Service. The letter we've just looked at is referenced in the first paragraph. This is from a Mr. Lloyd, who's at the HSP division, NHS Directorate of the Welsh office, and says this of that proposal. The proposal and your draft have been discussed in our executive committee, that is the director, the chief medical officer, the chief nursing officer, and 3 divisional heads in the directorate. The feeling of the Executive Committee was that there was no point in altering the present organisation, about which there have been very few complaints, without very strong economic arguments for such an action. We feel that many of the advantages of scale are already afforded by the present organisation, and we do not see any need for or advantage in change at the moment. If, however, you decide to proceed, the Welsh office would wish to be involved from the very beginning. So, Sarah, another example of a strong desire from the Welsh office to be involved in and be contributing to various topics, including the management of the NBTS. So those are the 7 examples I said I'd give you in relation to management of blood and blood products. We're now going to look at some examples in relation to hepatitis. DHSC 0100 004 underscore 215. So this is a document, sir, that we can see at the top of the page. Looks as though it might have come jointly from the Department of Health in London and the Welsh office, certainly how the header looks. And we can see that this is a document dated 1971, and it's about hepatitis B. And it's a memorandum rather than a letter, and it essentially sets out the information at the time in relation to hepatitis B. We can see paragraph 1 that this committee was set up in relation to advise Secretaries of State for Social Services of Scotland and Wales. So we looked at this document, or a document like this in relation to Northern Ireland, but this is in the context of Wales, and we can see paragraph 2, the report has been accepted by the Secretaries of State for Social Services and Wales, and the boards are asked to implement the recommendations. So this might be an example, sir, of joint presentation of information in relation to hepatitis. We can see at the top of the page it appears to be coming from both the London Department of Health and the Welsh office in a form of a memorandum going out on the issue of hepatitis. The next document, please, and just for completeness, so you can see at the bottom of the page who it's going to, so regional hospital boards, boards of governors, hospital management committees. So next document, please, DHSC 0019 634 underscore 001. Now this is a very different type of document, sir. You can see that it's dated 25th of October 1989, so after the period of question that we're looking at in this presentation. And you can see from the top right-hand corner, it's a letter from a solicitor in Cardiff going to Treasury Solicitor Department. And what this document is about is the haemophilia HIV litigation. And it's a document that comes from the Welsh perspective on that litigation. And it's a preliminary outline view, as we can see in a moment. But it's of interest because it's one piece of information that suggests how the Welsh office, or at least the lawyers advising the Welsh office, were considering their role in relation to HIV and AIDS. So if you just look at the first paragraph, it's described as a first response about comments in relation to issues in the main statement of case that affects the Welsh office. It says our search for documents is only just beginning, clearly not yet in a position to provide anything like a complete picture, and there's a reference to not seeing the instructions from the Department of Health or the main defence or a draft of preliminary issues which Counsel intended circulating. So it's caveated in that way. But it's of interest, I think, because it illuminates a Welsh office perspective, possibly on the HIV litigation and its role. So if we just scroll down, Lawrence. While just above that heading, it says, while the position of the Welsh office generally is perceived as being on all fours with that of the Department of Health, I will attempt in this letter to comment on the relevant references as they appear in the main statement of case. So the opening position is that from a Department of Health Welsh office perspective, they say we were on all fours with what was happening in relation to AIDS decision making in the Department of Health in London. We look at the final paragraph at the bottom of that page. There's some comments on the legal structure and who the defendants are. And the Welsh office position at this stage is this, little a, that the Welsh office relies on the Department of Health to take the principal lead in determining national policy on matters relating to HIV and AIDS prevention, but contributes to the formation of policy through memberships of interdepartmental bodies and their subgroups. Over the page, please, Lawrence. And there's a list there of the sorts of groups that the Welsh office have been contributing to. So interdepartmental groups on AIDS, the expert advisory group on AIDS, and the Committee for AIDS Public Education, and reserves the right to adapt policies to the local circumstances in Wales. Then what we see here, sir, is a list of what the Welsh office has done in relation to the question of AIDS. So B has given advice and information by issuing circulars within Wales corresponding to those issued by the Department of Health in England. And there are some examples of circulars given there: August 83, January, February 85, and in 86. Then we see it, Roman numeral C, the things the Welsh office have said to have done on their own account. So on its own account, issued advice and taken action. And there are 3 examples there: asking the doctors to inform the CDSC of cases of AIDS, formation of an AIDS steering group in September 85, multidisciplinary body to monitor the development of AIDS, and then also issue guidance to all Welsh DHAs for the setting up of AIDS coordinating teams. And then if we can scroll down to the final paragraph on that page, it says this: the Secretary of State for Wales has overall responsibility for the determination of national policy in conjunction with the Minister for Health for the allocation of resources to district health authorities and for ensuring that objectives are being achieved and standards maintained. So, Sarah, I hope that's a useful insight as far as it goes in relation to how the lawyers for the Welsh office in 1989 viewed, on their first preliminary view, the relationship between London and Cardiff on the issue of HIV and AIDS. The next document, DHSC 301651. Now, sir, this morning in relation to Northern Ireland, I made a reference to the fact that Northern Irish representatives had not been included in a document sent by representatives from the Department of Health on the line to take. And this is the document that I was referring to. So we can see bottom of the page, 3rd of May 1983. You've heard oral evidence about this document, sir, but the suggestion here at the bottom of the page is it's a fairly wide distribution list, and we can see that Dr. Thomas, along with Mr. Davies from Scotland, Dr. Thomas from Wales is included in this letter. And then, Lawrence, if we scroll up to the top, please. The topic is that of AIDS, and the context is being asked to provide a briefing for the Prime Minister's questions on the stories of AIDS over the weekend. Paragraph 2. I attach a copy of the line to take, which went to number 10, with a background note written in supplementary question and answer form, both of which I'm circulating more widely within the office. And so you don't need to be reminded, but the line to take, of course, was the issue of no conclusive proof that the inquiry has considered, and we can just see that over the page, Lawrence. So there it is. Didn't go to Northern Ireland on the face of this document, but did go to Wales. Next document, please. HSSG 0010055_004, please. So this is a letter from Dr. Ferguson Lewis, and it looks to be within the Welsh office. So we can see at the top it's going to Dr. Lovett of the Welsh office. Now, so this relates to the press reports that were circulating in Wales and more broadly in the UK around the 3rd of May 1983 in relation to the case at Cardiff of a Welsh patient with AIDS. There's been an entire presentation on that. I'm of course referring to the case of Kevin Slater, and the details for that are set out in the presentation. But I'm just going to look at a couple of these documents from the perspective of the question that we're looking at today, which is the interaction between the Welsh office and the Department of Health. We can see in the bottom paragraph here, the Minister will also wish to note that the Medical Services Health Professional Group are further investigating the local situation and are in contact with DHSS colleagues nationally. So the perspective from inside the Welsh office in May 1983, dealing with the press and everything that we know that happened in Cardiff in May 1983, around then, that there is ongoing communication with the Department of Health in London. Next document, please. Prsc 003109. Now, this is a document that comes a year later. Lawrence, if you can just flip over the page for me. We can see it's the 3rd of August 1984, and it's from Dr. Smithies.
I think it's 13th of August, isn't it?
Sorry, 13th of August 1984, I'm grateful. From Dr. Smithies to Dr. Harris. You can see it at the top, yeah. And this was the proposal for the establishment of a working group of the Advisory Committee on the National Blood Transfusion Services in relation to a topic about the screening of blood for HTLV3. So that's the context of this. Second page, please, Lawrence. The suggested membership of this group to discuss this question about screening are many recognised names there, but nobody from the Welsh office. And if we scroll down, please, we can see that the Welsh office are considered as observers. So the Army, Scotland, Welsh office and Northern Ireland are proposed here to be observers rather than active members or core members of that group. There is subsequent correspondence that I'm not going to go to now, but it's set out in the presentation, that Dr. Crompton, who you'll recall was the CMO at this time, was asked if he wanted to be invited to an advisory group on AIDS. So again, I don't think we can put too much emphasis on this one document, but it does show for this particular issue about screening of HTLB3, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales were considered as observers rather than full members of this committee.
This particular body is looking at the consequences of the screening test for the National Blood Transfusion Service.
Yes.
So one would expect it to contain those who were actively involved in the transfusion service, and that's what it seems to have as a members of the working group, although they're under the chairmanship, I note, of somebody who is a Westminster Department of Health officer, or senior medical officer, I suppose.
Yes.
It may be wrong to categorise him as Westminster, but he's certainly senior principal medical officer of working from London. Yes.
So the next document is MRCO 40470_041, please. Now, this document needs a little bit of decoding, sir, and a little bit of broader reading, because on its face it's not particularly clear who it's from or what it's about. But we know that Dr. Jane Cope, was an individual who was working at the Medical Research Council, and a bit of digging suggests that MPWG was Mr. MPW Godfrey, who also worked at the MRC. There's no heading on this document, so it fits the suggestion that this was an internal document between two individuals of the MRC. What we see here is an attached letter from Mrs. Williams of the ABRC. I'll come on to explain that in a moment. And it says, I should be grateful if you would provide a suitable draft reply for Sir Kenneth Joseph to send to the Secretary of State for Wales. Now, Sir Kenneth Joseph was in the Department of Education and Science.
I think it's Keith Joseph.
Sorry, Keith Joseph. Thank you, sir. Let's turn up my notes of this. So what we can see here is a discussion, quote, that the scientific side you will have at your fingertips. The question of the Welsh Office involvement ties in with a move by the Office to assert independence from the DHSS. You will need to think about whether there is any case for giving way on that point and thereby establishing a precedent, or if we stick by the letter to the 1980 Concordat with the Health Department, which I think specified that the DHSS would take account of Welsh interests. But clearly that is not something that Sir Keith Joseph would want to get involved with, and is a matter of discussion between the Welsh Office and the MRC. So quite a lot in there, sir. But what I think we can make of this document is that there's a suggestion by two individuals working at the MRC that there's a perception of a desire for greater independence by the Welsh Office. Now, this reference to the 1980 Concordat doesn't, as far as I can establish, refer to an agreement between the Welsh Office and the Department of Health, which it could do on a first reading. What we have been able to find out is that in 1980 there was an agreement between the Department of Health in London and the MRC about how funds that were transferred from the department to the MRC were going to be spent. And
It looks as though, from the wording of this, it's seen as more than a concordat with the DHS or DHSC,
exactly, sir.
because it talks about health departments in the plural.
It does, sir.
So the suggestion is that the concordat was made between the MRC, if that's the right interpretation,
Yes.
and the health departments. That would be the departments which at the time were known as territorial departments.
Exactly. So we haven't, or I haven't at least, been able to find any document that sets out the terms of that concordant, the 1980 concordant, but it seems from the face of this document that it specified that the department would take account of Welsh interests. So within that agreement, there seems to be possibly some consideration that Welsh office interests would be considered with the spending of this money or the administration of the MRC. It's hard to be more definitive than that, but this document, I think, is useful to show at least a perception within the MRC that there was a desire for greater Welsh independence.
Well, that's independence from the DHSS.
Yes.
Yes, it is difficult to interpret, really. Thank you for your help on that. But it doesn't actually say whether the concordat was made with all four health departments, 3 of them, 2 of them. It's just a plural.
Yeah.
And you haven't got any document which records it in terms. Do you have any other document which refers to it?
No, there are some documents that I won't take you to that I have read about the moving of money from the from the department to the MRC, obviously outside really of our terms of reference. But what I haven't been able to find, unfortunately, because it says concordance, so you think, oh, there must be an agreement. I haven't been able to lay my fingertips on a specific document that sets out the terms. It would be interesting to see it, but I think that's probably as far as we can take it with this specific letter.
Yes, and what is the ABRC Secretariat?
So this relates to a movement to create a research centre in relation to epidemiological research for AIDS. So we do have that letter from Mrs. Williams. I'm not going to take it to you because it's not particularly relevant, but it's just, that's the context of a proposal by the MRC to create this new centre. So
RC stands for Research Centre, possibly. What does AB stand for?
So I don't know on my feet right now. We can find out that for you. But it's within this context of a new research centre for AIDS.
Yeah.
So that's that document, which maybe raises more questions than it answers. But the next one I want to take you to is DHSC 000 3685_053. Now, so the next couple of documents that I'm going to show possibly suggest, and I'm not going to put it any higher than that, or give examples of the Welsh office raising concerns or registering dissatisfaction with the Department of Health in London on a couple of topics. So this is the first one, 8th of January 1986, and we can see that it's going to a Mr. Allen, Department of Health in London. If we just scroll down, please, Lawrence. It's from a Mr. Gregory. Top of the page, please. So this is from the Welsh office, and it's saying this, that there's been some correspondence which recorded the considerable concern here at the time it was taking to issue guidance to surgeons, anaesthetists and dentists on the treatment of actual or potential AIDS sufferers. So this is a register of concern by the Welsh office to London that this particular guidance on how these clinicians are treating actual potential AIDS sufferers is taking too long. Recent inquiries suggest that there is still no immediate prospect of that guidance, issuing, because it's become entangled with difficulties which are being experienced in agreeing the guidelines to be issued by the ACDP. So this letter includes, penultimate paragraph, I must ask for an urgent indication of what is to be done to uncouple the issue. So this is possibly the Welsh office pressing London to say, why is this particular guidance taking so long? So that's one example. So I'm assisted by those to my right in relation to the ABRC. It's the Advisory Board for the Research Council, the Mrs. Williams letter. Advisory Board for the Research Council.
Thank you.
So this is one example of perhaps a register of...
If it's Advisory Board for Research, what does the C stand for?
Research Council.
Thank you. Advisory Board for the Research Council.
Yeah, ABRC.
And do you know, have a relationship with the Medical Research Council?
I don't know, sir. The next document in this theme, HSSG 001 0218. Can you just go to the next page, please, Lawrence? So this is a rather longer document, and if you scroll to the end, please, Lawrence. We don't have any particular author, and then just scroll to the top, please, Lawrence. But the context appears to be a letter from Sir Keith Stay that was on the 6th of October 1986, and Lord Fowler's evidence, sir, to the inquiry covers this in a little bit of detail. But in essence, what this document seems to be is a response by the Welsh office to some points that are made in that letter. And if we can just look at paragraph 1, what we see here is this. The Welsh office appreciated from the start the need to educate the public using best expertise available, and it sets out various Welsh measures that have been taken in relation to AIDS. So we can see various campaigns, media seminars, surveillance studies, dentist surveys. And then paragraph 3, please. We can see a statement that the Welsh office has supported the DHSS advertising campaign. So we can see there that there's positive support that was given by the Welsh office to the DHSS. Bottom of that paragraph, DHSS seem unwilling to make use of the HEC, whose primary function is to meet this sort of requirement. And then over the page, please. Again, there's some more detail in relation to what the Welsh office have been doing. There's an address of the particular points in the letter, but the final lines of paragraph 4. Outside these groups, DHSS have been very poor about consulting other health departments on the handling of most AIDS topics and have been slow to respond to our representatives. So again, we touched on it briefly in relation to that concern about the guidance for all surgeons, anaesthetists and dentists, but there is a key flavour in some of these documents that there has been a delay, or the perception by the Welsh office is that things have been slow. So the last topic that I'm going to move on to relates to the correspondence between Norman Fowler and Nick Edwards of the Welsh office. Now, Norman Fowler gave evidence to this inquiry.
Just a moment. Can we just go back?
Yeah.
Thank you. And back to the second page. So the Sir Kenneth Stowe's points. A speaks for itself. B, was that one of Sir Kenneth Stowe's points? The promiscuity is the root cause of our problem?
So my reading of this is that this was an interpretation by somebody in the Welsh office, and the reason it's difficult to really take much from this aspect is we don't know who's writing it.
No, but it indicates a sort of it indicates a view.
It does indicate a view in relation to promiscuity. I don't have to hand the points set out in Sir Kenneth's letter to do a compare and contrast. But you can see that some of these matters are a bit broader than the terms of this inquiry. So talks in schools by the Welsh AIDS campaigns.
Well, he's talking
drug
about
misuse.
AIDS more generally than AIDS in blood.
Exactly.
Or in blood products, but it's still talking about AIDS.
Yeah.
And it talks about education on one hand, and then it's either quoting Sir Ken Stowe, or it is setting out an independent view that there could be, it would be consistent with there being some form of moral crusade, which rather suggests a stigmatization of those who suffer. And that's why my eyes suddenly alerted on this.
Possibly. It seems to be in B that there's a suggestion from Sir Kenneth that there shouldn't be a moral crusade, and this author was saying, well, what's wrong with some sort of moral crusade? Promiscuity is the root cause of our problems. I mean, that's
so
quite
to understand what is really being said there, one needs to have a look at Sir Ken Stowe's points. We must have that.
I'm sure we do. I don't have it to hand right now. It's something we could follow up on.
Well, I think it would be useful to have a comparison of what is being responded to with the response, without which the response here doesn't make much sense, and it might indicate, and that might be quite interesting, a difference in approach between those who are concerned with Welsh administration and those who are concerned with the administration in the rest of the mainland. Possibly,
although we don't know who authored this document. But I can certainly do some more digging in relation to that, and we can update the presentation if that would be useful.
Yes, but I think at some suitable moment it might be useful to revisit this letter if it has anything significant to say about the attitude being struck either by Sir Kenneth Stowe or by the person who is responding in some official capacity to his letter.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
So the final aspect I just wanted to touch on, and I'm going to do so lightly, is that of the correspondence between Norman Fowler and Nick Edwards being the Secretary of State for Wales at this period. You've heard this evidence relatively recently, sir, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Miss Richards asked Mr. Fowler a series of questions about correspondence that was sent between Norman Fowler and Nick Edwards in late 1985, so October 1985, on the issue of the introduction of screening for HIV. I'm not going to go through the same level of detail again, but you'll recall that Norman Fowler's evidence was that there was a robust exchange between Nick Edwards and Norman Fowler, and his language was that they were friends and that they were used to writing in quite robust terms to each other. What it does suggest is that there was some open dialogue and open communication, and we're just going to look at two of those letters in that context. So could we turn up, please, DHSC 0044118, please. So that's the letter that comes from, we can see, Nicholas Edwards at the Welsh office to Norman Fowler, and it starts on the 8th of October 1985. And he says this: since my department has responsibilities for housing, education and employment, as well as health services, I am particularly conscious of the need to address these wider issues. Look forward to hearing about steering group arrangements. Mark Robinson will represent the Welsh office on this group. And then we go down. There's a reference in the second paragraph. The Welsh office will need to be represented on that too at a senior level. This would go some way to promote the close liaison that is needed between our departments, both on the wider implications of AIDS and on those aspects relating primarily to the health service. So again, this is some evidence of a quite strong Welsh position saying that representation is sought at a senior level on these various committees and groups on AIDS. Then the third paragraph relates to the issue of AIDS testing kits and the concerns there about monitoring the kit's performance. And he copies in various individuals there. And then if we can go to ARCH 5068, please. This is another letter from him, 18th of October 1985. Since I wrote to you on the 8th of October, I've been given a detailed presentation by my officials, and there's a discussion in relation to the quality of kit. Second paragraph, be that as it may, I accept that even unreliable testing is better than no testing at all. And then there's a discussion about kits in more detail. So the oral transcript, as you will recall, demonstrates a discussion between Miss Richards and Mr. Fowler about these documents. And the way it was left was that Mr. Fowler, I think, was going to write to you with his interpretation on some of this evidence. So I'm just highlighting this as an example of open channels of communication and a fairly robust, in Mr. Fowler's words, exchange between these two individuals. So those were all of the documents that I wanted to highlight in relation to the position of Wales. We can see that from the evidence available, particularly in comparison to Northern Ireland, it appears that there was more dialogue, greater representation and more discussion by the Welsh office. Perhaps unsurprising when one considers the makeup of the arrangements. There's a clear difference between direct rule in Northern Ireland and Wales being part of the England and Welsh blood transfusion service, for example. We continue to investigate whether there will be any further oral evidence on this topic. And so I'll of course come back to you in relation to the point you raise about that letter. But unless there's anything else I can assist you with, that's the presentation for both Northern Ireland and Wales.
No, well, thank you very much.
And that then concludes the business for today.
Having said I'm done, sir, I'm afraid I'm not. I've got one reference from behind me for Sir Kenneth Stowe's letter, which I'm grateful for, which is HMRT 608_044 for those that want to go and look up that letter.
Well, can we possibly get it up, or do we need to take a break to do that?
No, sir, we don't have it. What we can do is...
We have a reference, so we don't have it.
Well, we don't have it on...
Well, can we get it loaded, do you think, and then come back and have a look at it?
Yes, I'm sure we can.
Because we have plenty of time.
We do, yeah.
And how long will that take, do you think?
15 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's take a break for 15 minutes and come back at 25 to 1. Yes.
So we found that document and it's on screen, but I should say that for the note, this was a document that was considered and set out in the presentation last week on the CMOs. For your note, that's INQY 40362, and it's on paragraph 143 onwards of that presentation, sets out this document. But we can see 6th of October 1986, and if we scroll down, so the particular element you were interested in was the use of language in the Welsh office letter about promiscuity, and the question that's put there at little b, can this be done without...
So what we need is to have a split screen, don't we? To have the letter on one hand and the response on the other.
Yeah, I've got that in hard copy. Can we do that? So the reference for the Welsh is HSSG 0010218, and it's on page 3 of that document. So you can see the question that's being asked in B is, can this be done without provoking or condoning some kind of moral crusade against, e.g., sexual promiscuity, prostitution, homosexuality? No, is the answer. What is wrong with some sort of moral crusade? Promiscuity is the root cause of our problem.
So if we can go back to A, please, on the left-hand side, to see what he's suggesting. How best can the general population be reassured, as they need to be? And B, can this be done without provoking or condoning some kind of moral crusade? No. And what's wrong with the moral crusade? And the promiscuity is the root cause of our problem. So this is a view being expressed at the time by somebody responsible in the Welsh office. There's a circulation list, is there, with the Sir Kenneth Stowe's letter, the very last paragraph, perhaps, on page 2.
Yes, can we just turn that up, Lawrence? Yeah, so page 2 of that document, please. Don't worry. Yeah, HMTR, the second page of that.
And so at the very bottom, the second name looks as though it may be Welsh, but of course that may be entirely misleading.
It may be misleading, sir.
Do you happen to know, from looking at those names, whether any of them is a name which you will have come across in your preparation?
None of those names I have come across, I have to say.
But in any event, it's obviously sent to a limited circulation.
Well, we don't know who it was sent to as much as we don't know
copying it initially too.
Sorry, of this document, yes. My point was that of the other document, we don't know either the author or who it went to.
No.
So
But,
there could be a comment on promiscuity, but I don't think it takes us.
Well, it's just, I think, a timely, perhaps, reminder that what Sir Kenneth Stowe says, if you go back to the first page, above, please. Thank you. The official committee, chaired by Strawn Heppel, reporting to a ministerial committee at Minister of State level, chaired by the Minister for Health, now Tony Newton, has not been able to secure as yet either acceptance of a sufficiently comprehensive analysis of the UK problem or the necessary commitment to urgent action, especially in the field of public education. And then the analysis must inevitably raise difficult and controversial issues for ministers. Without attempting to be comprehensive, one can instance, and these are the questions which he regards as difficult and controversial. And it's, how can you reassure the population without having a moral crusade? The answer comes back from Wales, you can't. And what's wrong with the moral crusade? And then C then comes into play. How far can the government go in advising and assisting promiscuous homosexuals and or drug addicts on the techniques they should avoid or practice to reduce the risks they're exposed to? So it's an indication, at any rate, of the views and attitudes that were swirling around at the time in response.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's useful context, I think. So thank you very much. Is there anything else that arises from the letter that you want to draw my attention to? Thank you. Well, that does conclude, does it?
It does.
The presentation. Yes. And tomorrow?
Tomorrow we have Mr. McNiven giving oral evidence. Right.
Mr. McNiven. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Is he in person or remote?
In person.
Thank you.
Sir.